can take it away.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to our last Women in Leadership webinar, but of the year. I'm Fabiola Guerra from Tech Mahindra, and today we will have a very successful women talking about the journey of staying relevant. And I'm excited to present today Anni Chang, VP Creative Technologies from Universal Pictures, Cheryl Idell, VP Consumer Insights from Netflix, and Ilyanne Morden Kichaven from former executive director Los Angeles at SAG-AFTRA. They will give us their experience on how they have been able to challenge themselves to be ahead of the game and some advices of staying relevant in this very competitive world. As always, please feel free to chat with us and share your opinions. And if you have any questions for our panelists, drop them in our Q&A window. But as always, we are happy to introduce our passionate and energetic Debbie Menin, our moderator. And then our anchor and fun host, Sumit Grover. Sumit, over to you now.
Thank you, Fabi, for the kind introductions. Good day, everyone. I truly hope you and all yours are safe and healthy. As Fabi said, I'm your host, Sumit, for the evening. And to our entire audience, a warm welcome to you once again for tuning in. We wish you a very joyous and safe holiday season. Talking about holidays, also the season of giving, allow me to extend our heartfelt gratitude to those of you who joined us in giving a gift of education to girl children during the Thanksgiving break. If you're still looking for this season to give, look no more. We have joined hands with Mission No Child Hungry with an aim to help feed poor children in India and save them from malnutrition. If you wish to join the mission, you can use the link in the chat window that Asmi is sharing now to know more and help over 95 million children who've been deprived of daily meals during these tough times. I thank you again for looking into this and your kind consideration. I can't believe we are airing the final episode of season 2, and what better lineup than today's to sum it up. We're all in this together, from being our own chief soul officer to the start of giving, and from the cumulative and ripple effect to staying relevant. I just named all the major topics we covered in this year, and staying relevant as the calendar changes yet again, here we are. As we wind down the week to get into spending quality time with family and friends, it feels great to be among such inspirational leaders, and I cannot wait to learn about each of your life stories and how you've managed to keep growing throughout your diverse careers. Welcome, Annie, Cheryl, and Ilyanne to our show. It would be an understatement to say that all of you had an awe-inspiring career. Over the years, you've constantly kept innovating and evolving yourselves to further climb the ladder in your corporate and personal lives. You've discovered the secret to staying relevant no matter how fast the industry and the world changed. Today, we want to ask some very simple questions on how. How is it that you've managed to upscale even in the most volatile markets and stay one step ahead of the game? And if tech is the future, digital is the future, how does evolving with the time help you stay relevant? I'm sure through your life stories, we will all look back to who we are, what we've done this year to keep up, and what can we do to stay ahead in 2022 and beyond. So without further ado, let's kick it off with our very own Debbie Menin.
Thank you, Sumit. I think he'd be a good moderator. He had a lot of good questions there. Before we get started, I just want to say that this particular topic is very relevant to me, as I have gone through my career and made conscious decisions to make change for the reasons of staying relevant and trying to stay ahead of the curve. So there's a little story here. I want to provide context on how I've met each one of the amazing panelists today. So going back a few years before I ever worked in technology, I had a career in advertising. And this is actually when I met Ilyanne. She was a client of mine working at an independent film distribution company. And I had a wonderful opportunity to get to know her, became friends. She'll share a little bit more about her story in a minute. At the same time, when I was actually working at Variety, we were doing a 25th anniversary issue on Western International Media, which is a big agency, and we were publishing a 25th anniversary issue. So because of that, I met Cheryl, who was running research at the time, working on accounts such as Disney, and we'll hear more about where she went after that. So my thought is, after many years, I worked in magazines. Then, you know, magazines became a little obsolete. So I transitioned into TV and then realized really in order to stay ahead of the curve, I ultimately moved to all digital. And that's when I finally ended up joining a company called the Advanced Imaging Society. It's a non-for-profit association, and it kind of sits in between all the tech firms with the CTOs and the entertainment CTOs, which is when I met Annie. We actually were honoring her as one of the distinguished women in technology in Los Angeles. And she was actually moving from Universal to Disney. Funny story. I couldn't get a hold of her to tell her she won this big award because she left and we didn't know she had left Disney going over to Universal. So anyway, long story short here, we've got some good stories to tell, but I do want to say this. If we can do this, so can you, and keep that in mind. I've been following their careers for so many years, and I think they're perfect to talk about this topic. So let's get into it. Ilyanne, I'm going to start with you. Do you mind just taking 1 minute or so and telling us a background snapshot of your life to date?
Sure. Hi, Debbie. Good morning, everybody, and happy holidays. So when I approached Debbie with an idea for this topic, it's really because in my career in entertainment and media for way too many decades, I'm not even going to say, you can guess, I've had to pivot, change, stay relevant, keep current with trends, because it has just changed so much during my lifetime, and the way how people view programming, how programming is made. So I did start out in pre-production, post-production, in production itself, and then distribution. Had a very long career in distribution, happened to fall into a job at a wonderful labor union, Screen Actors Guild, and stayed there for 21 years. And I'm still keeping relevant, still doing things. I decided to leave in March, and now I'm on to a new chapter of my life, and I'm pivoting once again. So I think it's really important to talk about this, to find out how you can still follow your passions, even if your passions take you to different corners.
Wonderful. So Cheryl, do you want to jump in here? And there's something about you that has a curiosity about people that I think was like a common thread throughout your career. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I mean, I landed and literally just coincidentally landed as a researcher. I was in college and literally still in college. So at 20 years old, I got my first job as an intern at what was then Ted Bates Advertising. And the guy who ran the internship program said to me, well, what do you want to do? Media planning, media buying, or media research? Those are the three areas, in this space. And I said, what do I know? I'm 20 years old. I'm going to be an intern. And he happened to run the research department. And so I landed there and discovered that I loved data. I loved understanding and learning about people and what data would tell me about people. And I could have never anticipated that. I never, thought I would become a researcher, and it just stuck. And that is something that I've discovered throughout every stage of my career, whether I've been on the agency side, which is where I started, on the media company side when I worked at 20th Century Fox, which is what it was called then, whether I worked in tech startups, which were research startups, a company called IAG, which was a very small company, to the largest research company in the world, Nielsen. It was always centered around understanding what made people tick and finding the data, whether it was qualitative or quantitative data, And that is still, to this day, the thing that I find most interesting in my career. And it's something that is a skill set that's really useful anywhere. And as technology has evolved, at the core of what I do is still using the data and technology-enabled data that's available to understand human insights and consumer insights. And so the guts of what I've done has always pretty much stayed the same, but the technology of how we do it and the kinds of companies I've done it for really is what's changed over all these years.
Can you list the companies really quickly?
Yeah, well, I worked for a bunch of agencies in New York that don't exist as agencies anymore. So Ted Bates Advertising and DMB&B and SSC&B, you know, they all were all the initials of everybody. Then I spent a long time at Western Media, which evolved to become Initiative, which is what it is now. I worked at Fox. From Fox is where I pivoted a bit. I went back into the agency world. I went to Nielsen from Fox. I can't even keep track of it myself. And spent a number of years at Nielsen, and then back to the agency world for a bit. And that was when I then pivoted into tech, and I took a role at Snap. Very, very different in size, scale, scope, and the essence of what the company did. And from Snap, I went on to also work at Warner Media, at Quibi for a short time. Not that anybody was able to work at Quibi for more than a short time. Warner Media as part of the launch of HBO Max, which set me up perfectly for what is my dream job that I have now, which is leading consumer insights at Netflix.
See, it's all meant to be. So you had a skill set, which was research, but you kept it relevant to wherever the technology went by taking these new jobs with companies like Snap. And
absolutely, very deliberately and learning, and just always, and you started out by talking about my curiosity, and that's really what fueled all of it, right? Continuing to stay curious and learning about these new companies and new technologies.
Yeah. So I think about, you know, the idea of staying relevant, and think about, Ilyanne said this the other day, it's you rewire yourself, right? So you're changing these jobs. It's not always easy. You know, there's a learning curve that goes like this, trust me, but you need to do it. It's a necessity. So I'm just curious if you guys, whoever wants to answer the question, want to talk a little bit about why do you do it? What is your passion that drives you to do it? Did you feel like you need to, or that you wanted to? Whoever wants to answer that.
So Debbie, I'll jump in because, you know, it's interesting when I think about my career. So after I bounced around in production, pre-production, post, I discovered I really had a great talent for marketing, strategic alliances, and publicity. And I worked for companies. I worked on films like Terminator, Platoon, Last Emperor, Hoosiers, you know, I mean, and I worked on Academy Award campaigns for The Secret of for the scent of green papaya and The Secret of Ronin-ish. But what was one of the things that I'm kind of proud of is that, I'm going to sound like a dinosaur, but when the internet was first really being launched, I created one of the first websites for the company that I was working for overseas. And I actually did the marketing and the publicity for the very first film that was streamed over the internet, Party Girl. Now it was it's nothing like you'd want to see, because it's, you know, the streaming capability then was awful, but I knew that this was going to be, and again, I'm going to sound like a dinosaur, but that's okay. I knew that this was the wave of the future. So by staying relevant, I read everything I could, figured out what the internet, what the possibilities were. And I actually, after built my own company at the time, using the advantage of having that knowledge where other people didn't have it, by creating marketing opportunities, strategic on a national and international basis, because I saw the potential, but I kept learning and I was able to recognize that. And then again, later on, when I was at the union, I realized that our customer base, our members, for those who don't know, Screen Actors Guild is the largest performers union. They represent everyone behind a microphone and in front of a camera. So at SAG-AFTRA, I recognized that we had to keep up with the marketplace as well. So we started a digital transformation. We started doing apps. We started working with my colleagues in IT, and I was an executive director then, but I was working with the chief communications officer. So again, you have to keep up, and you have to really read and figure out what's the trend. You really have to keep a step ahead. And I think that that's really been an advantage for me. And even now I'm still reading on everything. And I can talk later about some of the other challenges that I've taken on, which are out of my comfort zone. But I think that that's really important. When you talk about relevance, you really have to keep it's a continuing education.
Who else wants to jump in on that?
You're muted,
Sure.
Annie.
There you go.
There you go. Sorry, I think you accidentally skipped me for my background, but I will combine that answer to the question with the.
Go back and do that. Let's do your background first.
No, it's always right. I was going to answer the question and that you had about rewiring. I actually started out wanting to be a veterinarian, but the biomedical sciences I don't think really worked for me for some reason. I don't know. It worked for me in high school, but not in college. And so I leaned into my engineering background, and I was playing bass in college and everything, and doing a lot of recording. And I thought, oh, it'd be great to be a recording engineer. So I moved out to LA from Texas to become a recording engineer, but I didn't know anybody. But then again, I leaned into my engineering, my problem-solving background type of thing. And I was really lucky in some ways, but at the same time, you lean on your skill set that you have. And I started a job in this new technology called DVD a long time ago. And it was great because you had to learn everything about it. It was the first digital media, truly digital media. Even Laserdisc was like partially analog, right? So this was the first consumer format that was out there and it was a whole new world. But it was great because it was just something that really kind of spoke to me. It really helped that I had the engineering and the mindset and the problem solving mindset. And then from there, I was, again, very lucky to be on the forefront of various technologies like the early days of digital cinema, the digital intermediates, which are called DI, which is the way we finish movies nowadays, digitally, and just started kind of understanding how digital media worked. And so I started out actually in digital distribution technologies. So things like very, very early days of like iTunes, streaming and Blu-ray, for example, and then went into 3D Blu-ray and started going into, a lot of these various, electronic sell-through type of technologies. And then just to answer your question about the rewiring bit, I started noticing that I started getting a little bored actually. And I think that was kind of my key to like figure out that I needed to rewire myself somehow. But I really enjoyed I just have this affinity for file formats and compression schemes. I'm just weird that way. And image quality and audio quality and that sort of thing. And so what was happening at Disney at the time was we were starting to shoot on digital cameras. And there was this whole new world opened up again, like, this digital revolution. And people started going like, what's a workflow? Like, what's compression? What's encoding? I don't understand that stuff. And so I basically took the jump, even though I didn't have any production experience. I never thought I was going to actually be working in that sort of area of movies. But because I had that knowledge about file formats, workflows, and compression schemes, I made the move into production technology, which was really super early budding type thing. There wasn't a lot of people in that space at the time. And I've been there ever since. So that was about 2012 that I made that transition. And now I head up creative technologies at Universal Pictures, where we look at new technologies and workflows for the creation of our movies. And so that's everything from anything to do with like creative development through production, physical production, and post-production, visual effects, finishing, and the archive of our movies.
Annie, where does the drive come from? Is it, like you said, you might get bored, or do you want to push your boundaries, or you want to change something in the industry?
Yeah, for me, I just like to solve problems. That's my big thing. And so I just always wanted to kind of keep things moving forward however I could. And I think one of the things that is really important is the whole collaboration, obviously, and diversity of thought, right? You want to have as many opinions in the room as you can because you'll create a better product in the end. So that was also one of my things, is like always talking to other groups to figure out, like, well, how are you doing this? And like, maybe we could collaborate on this and brainstorm on these ideas. And it started out actually at Disney. There was always a rift actually between the television and the studio side. It still is in a lot of companies. But I mean, I would just start talking to the engineers of the other divisions and just start finding out, like, what are you doing? Because in the early days, we didn't actually have file formats that we could actually utilize to put our movies on. And so that was actually one of my proud moments, was helping Disney move into digital files completely and get away from videotape, basically. But there were no formats at the time. So it was really just an interesting problem to solve to me. And I actually, strangely enough, we can talk more about this later, but I always had this idea like years ago. I told a friend that it's like, I think it'd be really cool to move a studio from videotapes to files. Just thought that would be a fun thing to do. But I had no means to do it, but I just kind of kept that in my head, and eventually got to do it, and it was really fascinating. And so I think part of it for the rewiring thing is always thinking to yourself, like, what can you do to make things better in the industry or wherever you're at? And then you might not have the means to be able to do it or the opportunity, but just keep it in your mind, and eventually you can get there. And then once you get there, you can execute. So I think that's part of the whole rewiring thing, is like, don't get bored, and then also keep thinking of like things that you can do to make things better.
Well, that's impressive. Thank you. Cheryl, do you want to jump in and just remind you, because I asked the question a while ago, why did you do it? Did you feel like you had to, or that you needed to, or did you want to? Where did that come from?
I realize, as I really think back to, the earliest days of getting more involved in digital and in tech, part of it is it was my job, right? So being a researcher, it was my job to stay ahead of the trends. So, talk about, Ilyanne referred a couple of times to feeling like a dinosaur. I was at Western Media really pre-internet, or when the internet was sort of first being talked about as a possible advertising mechanism. And it was my job to do things like host client conferences on the information superhighway.
Yeah.
Remember when we called it that? And educate marketing departments about how we were going to use this thing called the internet. And this was back in the day where like AOL was America Online, and you'd use your 2400 baud modem to dial in, and there were no ads. And then I moved on to Fox, and it was still pretty early days. And this was, in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was still pretty early days of digital advertising. And we did some of the first big campaigns on MySpace and skinned MySpace for the Fantastic Four. And if you put your favorite character there, you got to go from your 4 top friends to your 8 top friends, if you remember back in those days. So as I'm thinking about that rewiring, I'm really reflecting on the fact that I've been doing that my entire career. And whether it's a bit of a chicken egg thing, it's probably why I landed in research, because I had this innate curiosity to understand what was happening. But it also was my job to be able to understand those trends and project them forward. And so then for my own personal career, I got to the stage where I realized that I needed to not just talk about these things and study these things and advise others, but I actually needed to make the move myself. And to stay relevant personally and continue to be rewired, I needed to actually work for a company that was in this technology space, and not just, because I couldn't continue to talk about it and advise about it if I wasn't actually doing it. And so when I made the move to go to Snap, I think I'm probably pivoting a little bit into like your next question about, choices to stay relevant, but I think these two are very interrelated, right? The sort of continual rewiring and then staying relevant. It was that I knew that I had to, on paper, take a bit of a step back and say, if I'm going to move into a tech company, there's a lot of skills I don't have. So there are skills I have that are transferable, but then there are things I don't know. And so I took what was a much smaller job so that I could be in a tech company, understand how tech companies work, because they're set up very, very differently. They have different kinds of people. They have engineers and they have product managers and they have product marketing people. Those were things that didn't exist in other companies I'd worked for. So I took a job with a couple of people who reported to me who were a few years out of school so that they could teach me how to become proficient in technology and adapt my existing skill sets to the new world, if you will.
Yeah, it sounds like you've really made conscious decisions in order to stay relevant. At some point, you have to leave a company to go somewhere that is relevant. I mean, it's clearly why you went from an agency to Fox to Nielsen, and then you went into Snap, Netflix, and Warner in this job. So I think it also sounds like it was personal drive too, like you like doing that.
Absolutely. I like to push the envelope. I'm fine with discomfort, although
Yes.
I will say, and I will bet that every single person who is listening and watching right now has experienced imposter syndrome, and absolutely have experienced that when I sat down the first day to do my job at Fox. It was a job I had never done before. I was in charge of all of the media, all of the paid advertising, $1 billion budget, more or less, probably a little less, for all of home entertainment and theatrical. I'd never done it. I sat down my first day at my desk and in my head was saying, I don't know how to do this job. And then I sat down the first day of Snap and realized I don't really understand what these people around me do. And I think every one of those pivots came with some level of imposter syndrome. But then you learn and you grow and you get over it.
Yeah, Cheryl, I think you hit it on the head there, right? It's like, I know people always think, oh, Annie, you know all this stuff and everything. And I'm like, no, I still have the imposter syndrome, here and there too, because I think you want to be uncomfortable, right? Because if you're too comfortable, that kind of speaks to the bored part of what I was saying earlier. It was like, if you get too comfortable with where you're at, then you're probably needing to do a change, right? You need to actually start trying something different to really kind of stretch yourself, because you have to be uncomfortable, unfortunately. But you just plow through it, right? And it just makes you a better person and you learn a lot more. So
Well,
I appreciate that, Cheryl.
Since Ilyanne was at SAG for 21 years, you didn't change jobs for it. But Ilyanne, what did you do to stay relevant, get out of your comfort zone?
I had a really interesting journey with SAG. I started in 2000. I was just brought on for 2 weeks as a consultant to do some marketing and some publicity for them for a diversity event. And then they went on strike. It was one of the longest commercial strikes in history, and the whole communications department left. And so all of a sudden they asked me to step up and be the spokesperson and run the communications department as a consultant yet. I wasn't even on staff. And so the first thing I had to do was really study, like, what were the issues of the strike? What were the issues of performers? What kind of things and fortunately, I had been in production. So I had gone to school, I majored in theater arts. So I kind of knew the journey of an actor, but I knew the business from working in post-production and in distribution, working for all those companies. I actually knew both sides of the issue. I hadn't worked though in the area of commercials, but I had friends that did. So again, doing a lot of research and curiosity served me well, and being very intentional. I think that it was Cheryl who said, when you make decisions, be intentional, be deliberate, or maybe Annie said it. And I think that that's really important. So then they finally put me on staff for 5 years. I was head of the Chief Communications and Marketing Officer, and my job, the executive director of Los Angeles, of Hollywood at the time, was empty. So what I did is I knew I could it was very clear to me when the LA board decided that they wanted an executive in Los Angeles and the job had been empty for 5 years, I knew it wasn't going to be the same. The landscape had changed, the structure had changed. It was just a different animal. Also, I was very, very different than the person that had been in that job 5 years ago. If I can say this, lovely, lovely man, but it was an older white guy who had very, you know, kind of tunnel vision of, you know, how the place was run. So I approached it to go for this job. It was kind of interesting. I was interviewed by a bunch of actors, not by executives, but I approached it as a consultant would. And I figured out what could I bring from my individual strengths to this job that would help succeed what their goals were, that would align with the mission, that would actually stretch and expand the company to make it, or the organization to make it stronger. So I actually came, when I interviewed, I came with a written marketing proposal, almost like a presentation. And I gave a presentation about why they needed to hire me, because this is what I was going to do for them. So it was so again, when you talk about keeping relevant, I came to them and I said, you're missing all these opportunities. You don't have relationships with the TV Academy, the Motion Picture Academy, MPTF, which is the Motion Picture TV Fund, very, very important to performers. You don't have, the producers are your allies on so many issues because you've got so much commonality. Yes, your opponents at the bargaining table when you're talking about money and things, but there's so much, you know, one thrives off the other. So I said to them, you need all these relationships, all these alliances. You should be doing these partnerships. And that's kind of how I got the job. Now, getting that job and being in that position for 16 years, you talk about not being bored. Fortunately, or unfortunately, I don't know, the board changes over, so you have different leadership, you've got different goals, and I'm talking about the unpaid leadership that's in the membership itself. The presidency and the board is all elected, it's unpaid. But during my tenure, I went through 8 or 10 national executive directors, 8 presidents, 12 office moves. I mean, it was like, and you know, all these different changes. I think I went through 11 supervisors. So it was a constant change. And also in about 10 years ago, we merged with AFTRA, which was a sister union. So that was a whole different change as well, because here I was a chief executive structuring a merger and structuring truly 2 different cultures of performers. And even though we had a lot of the same membership, it was so different. So it was like starting with a new company and making things change. So you're constant, and as technology is changing, production is changing. You know, when I started, the hub of production really was California and Los Angeles. And by the time by the time 21 years has passed, you know, there's production all over. There's incentives in every state, you know, in almost every, not every state, but almost, you know, a lot of different states going international. How do you keep, and the delivery of the platforms, my goodness, you know, it was a big deal when I started that cable was the talk of everything. It was cable going to be the future. Now, all of a sudden you're talking about how you're getting paid and how you're going to work in streaming. So again, it's curiosity, it's educating yourself. And I was really lucky because every day it was kind of something new. And every day I was able to help someone or do something to keep up, but I kept inventing opportunities along the way and I never stopped. So that's, for me, that's how I kept it fresh and that's how I kept it interesting. And I was very fortunate that the people I worked with let me be me and let me go on this and were along with me on this journey and really helped me create all this. It was a wonderful partnership. And it really proved to be beneficial for everyone. And even, you know, my colleagues, you know, in the industry, I mean, I developed wonderful relationships with not only people in the industry, but I was doing legislative as well. I was doing all the California and municipal legislation. So that was also really very interesting, meeting different people, doing different things. So I think that you can't be afraid to do things.
I want to jump in here on that topic of what Ilyanne's talking about. I think the audience here will understand who we're talking about here with Ilyanne and Annie and Cheryl. These are women that have really led the way. They've pioneered, you know, their charter. They were at a fork and they made a choice to go here, but there's reasons for it behind it. And all of that is the reason why these people have been honored. They've had awards. They've gone, you know, ahead of us, and they've been acknowledged, and I love that. And I just want to mention for just 1 second here, they've received awards and they've spoken in public, but by doing so, they let their light shine. I know each one of them and they're all very humble. So I want to say this, to acknowledge the fact that somebody else is honoring you is allowing other people to let their light shine as well. So it's a beautiful thing. So long story short, I know this isn't easy for you, but if you can try not to be humble for just a minute, I wanted to talk to all of you about what you've been acknowledged for. So Ilyanne, just on that, Ilyanne knows a lot of people in the industry. You can hear this by everything she's telling you, but she was acknowledged on lists. I think it was the LA Business Journal. You can tell me, but listed as top 500 most influential people in LA, top 100 most influential women in LA. But I'm just curious, Ilyanne, what did that mean to you?
Obviously a great, great honor, and especially for multiple years. It's always wonderful to be recognized for your work, and it's very, it's funny, Annie, was it Annie or Cheryl talked about imposter syndrome. You see yourself on the page with all these, studio heads and top executives, and I was on the page with, I think Ted Sarandos of Netflix, and I don't remember who else, but anyway, it's very, very, it's more than just flattering. What I really appreciated it, I will tell you, is that it was wonderful. First of all, it's a sense of, wow, I'm in the room and I've made it, which is wonderful after such a long career. But it also opened up a lot of doors for me in terms of recognition. As a result of being recognized as one of the 500 most influential people in LA, I actually got a seat on the Federal Reserve Board of San Francisco, Los Angeles branch. Now, for those of you that don't know, the Federal Reserve, which has been in the news continuously, they regulate all the monetary policy in the United States. And they said, if you're buying a house and you want to know what the interest rate is, that's set by the Federal Reserve. So it affects everyone in the United States. So my first reaction was, I got a request to come meet with them. And when they invited me to be on the LA board, I thought, what are they asking me for? I'm not in economics. I'm not a statistician. And they said, no, but we want you for your narrative. So what I could, that's one thing too, when you're keeping relevant, you figure out what can you bring that maybe somebody else can't bring. And on this board, what I could bring, and I still contribute, even though I'm off the board, I contribute to the Beige Book, which goes up to the Federal Reserve in Washington, which Janet Yellen heads. And I was fortunate to meet Janet, who's wonderful and brilliant. But what I could bring was, they have all the data. That's what economic and statisticians do. They have all the data and they can tell you how many people are employed or what inflation is. But what I could provide to them was the narrative. How does this affect you and I? How does this affect everyday people? Because a lot of people on the board were business owners, very high multi-millionaire, billionaire. I mean, Steve Ballmer was on the board, just to give you an idea, and Barry Meyer, who was the former head of Warner Brothers. But what I could bring was a narrative. I'm sorry, my dogs are barking in the background. I could bring a narrative of workers. I could tell them, yeah, people are employed, but how are they employed? What are minimum wages? How is this impacting? How is the reclassification of drivers at the port not treating them, paying them, and wage theft? I could actually tell them what's behind the data. So while the data may show you that people are employed, but guess what? Wages aren't keeping up. And I'm still doing this narrative, if healthcare goes away for everyone, what happens? If you have to pay everything out of pocket, that kind of thing. So that really keeps up with it. So getting that award opened up this whole door for me.
I was just thinking while you're talking, listen to the ripple effect that went beyond that award she got. But think of all the work that got her to the idea that she had the award, but because she had it, it gave her the credentials to be in a position to help all these other people with the effect that comes from it. So yeah, that's really inspiring.
I don't want to take up too much time, but that's just one door. I was also nominated to join the trusteeship, which is the International Women's Forum, which is an invitation-only club. I mean, you have people in this club. You've got, Nobel Prize winners. You have incredible high, I don't want to be a name dropper, but really high women in office. I mean, Hillary Clinton is a member, you know, it's Donna Shalala, you know, Madeleine Albright, they're all members of this group. And that's what got, and I'm part of that group. How I'm part of this club is just astonishing to me. But that's what that award, so that award meant not only validation, but it also opened up so many opportunities.
So let that inspire everybody that's listening today, that just continue to push yourself beyond your boundaries. I want to jump over to Annie, and I know that she has quite a few awards, especially the one that I gave her when I was at the Advanced Imaging Society, but she was one of the top innovators in our industry from the Hollywood Reporter last year during the pandemic, and also received the HPA League Honors Catalyst Award, as well as the Futurist Award by TV News Check. Now, it doesn't surprise me, Futurist Award, because you can tell by talking and listening to her that she's thinking about what's ahead of us right now. And it's people like that I think are going to make a big impact on this industry. So I just want Annie to talk a minute about, really, I want to know how this made you feel.
Yeah. Oh, it's fine. You know, it's nothing. No, it's awesome. I mean, you know, the thing is that, like Ilyanne was saying, it's like you work all this time, right, for all these different things. And it's really nice to actually get the validation and the recognition there. It's helpful to know that you're not crazy, and that people are like, oh yeah, that's you know, that Annie Chang, she's actually got some ideas. But again, it was, I think part of it was a validation that, you know, my journey of where I've gotten to here is all working like the way it really needs to be, right? And I don't know. I kind of wonder sometimes, like, if I didn't get the awards, would I still feel as, like, you know, satisfied and fulfilled with like what I've done so far? I'm not sure, actually. It's really nice to have those. But I think it was a lot of work, though, because it was, you know, I'm a technologist, I'm an engineer at heart. That means I'm also an introvert. And it's like, it's a lot to actually have to put yourself out there. And like I said, it's like I said before, it's like about the collaboration and everything. It wasn't just collaborating within different departments, you know, at the studio, but also I do a lot of industry work. And I got actually pushed into that, like early on, like around that 2012, during that transition period. I had a really great manager who really thought that I should start trying to get into more standards work.
Was it a man?
Man,
I'm curious.
It was a man. It was a white man. And I got to say, I think he was like the first and maybe only mentor that I had, because I've never had mentors in my life. Which is why I actually try to help others now, because I, you know, going, you know, through my career development, I actually never had any mentors, but this one was probably the closest one that I had. I'll name him out because he was great, Howard Luck. And he actually pushed me into the standard stuff, which I started, that's where I became like the mother of IMF, which is the interoperable master format. It's a file format that the industry uses now. But I helped, you know, guide that work through the standards work at SMPTE, the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. And then from that on, it's like I kind of caught the bug of like, oh yeah, you know, in order to actually get a lot of the like problems that I have in this industry solved through technology, you need to work with the industry, right? And you need people to agree. You need different, you know, studios with different agendas, and consumer electronic companies with different agendas, and, you know, all these manufacturers. You have to get all of them to agree and move forward in order to actually get somewhere in the industry. And so when I moved into production technology, obviously there was a lot of issues in the production side, because I think distribution, you know, we've kind of figured out a lot of the streaming stuff and file formats and things like that. It's pretty settled down, but like production and content creation is just this wild, wild west area, right? And it's really hard to automate, and, you know, you have creatives involved, and so things can, you know, it's just decisions abound, and it's like you can't ever predict them. But what we did think is that we did realize, like through my work at Disney and Marvel, and then moving to Universal, I realized, you know, we all had the same problems, and there's, you know, there should be common solutions in the world. So I worked with Movie Labs, which is a consortium of the Hollywood studios, to work on this Movie Labs 2030 vision. paper, which was all about what we think the future of filmmaking will look like in the year 2030. And this was done before the pandemic. So we had all the stuff about remote collaboration and all these crazy things about working in the cloud that people were just like, oh, that's too far out, so that's why we were like, okay, we'll put it out for 10 years, and then the pandemic hit. And now it's like, that hurdle of like people having to work remotely and collaborating over Zoom and things like that. It's like, that's actually helped, I think, work us towards achieving the Movie Labs 2030 vision sooner. I'm hoping to get it by 2025 so that we can get going, because there's, once you basically, it's all about embracing the fact that things are digital. Like even if you shoot on film, it turns into a digital file right away, right? So like, because of the digital nature of things, if you can track all that, you can start, running analytics, you can do AI on things, there's so many things that you can do once it's digital, but we just don't do it very well right now. And so that vision paper has a lot to do with it. So sorry about the context and the diversion of that, but just to give you some background on, I think it was really nice to hear, from, like I said, from the Hollywood Reporter, and then all these other awards, that this futurist thing, all I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to solve a problem. And but I know we can't get there without the industry work. And so just planting a lot of seeds and then trying to execute on this, little by little is kind of like where I'm thinking. But again, it's just nice to have the validation, because it's like, okay, I think I'm on the right track, I think. So it's helpful to see these, awards pop up and stuff. And it's really nice to receive. And again, like you said, Debbie, it's also helpful, I think, for other people to go, oh, wait, that's something I can aspire to, and, things to like try to do. And, it's like, it's funny because I'm just trying to help the industry, because I hate inefficiencies at heart, and I just want things to be better.
I think your role is much bigger than your job at Universal. You've taken on a key role in the industry, and for the audience today, it's all about volunteering for the community. And it's not just what our job is. And that's what all three ladies have done. But in this case, I'm going to do a quick Tech Mahindra plug. We've been working with a consultant from Movie Labs. And I know Annie was a big part of writing that 2030 vision. But here at Tech Mahindra as an SI, since we are agnostic to any one cloud provider or any one technology, we can encompass all of them. It's working with people like Annie in the community that we can help, with that whole supply chain in the cloud. And I do think the pandemic made a big, huge shift and helped the whole process moving along. But it's just wonderful to see someone like you behind it all, pushing it to go further, faster, farther, right? And that's why someone would honor you as a futurist. In fact, TED Talk, futurist, I see it now. All right, I'm going to jump over to Cheryl here. So Cheryl has done a lot of mentoring. She's led a lot of companies. She's spearheaded change in the industry like Annie has and Ilyanne has. But she also leads by example. She speaks in public. She's been honored, and all of that makes a difference. But I'd love for her to talk about what her greatest accomplishment is, and should I also say your greatest compliments? That is an S. You can start with the compliment.
Sorry, what was that last thing you said?
Start with the greatest accomplishment.
Yeah, I mean, I'll make it a little more personal, I guess, when it comes to, whenever I think about this, because yeah, I've done mentoring and I've gotten, recognition for, from companies, for different things that I've done. But when I look at where I feel like I've made the biggest difference, and it is an extension of the mentoring that I've done of folks, actually is in my own home, where, my daughter, who has, and I hate to say followed in my footsteps, it's more that she's paved her own way, for sure. But it has been in a very similar field. When she was going to school, she decided she wanted to major in media studies. I thought that was when she was starting college, and I thought that was because it was something that she had seen and grown up with because of me growing up in LA, her friends and their families all being part of this, Hollywood and entertainment community. And so I kept encouraging her to explore different things. But sure enough, media studies became the thing that that worked for her. And, you know, probably one of the first accomplishments is when she invited me to speak, or her professor invited me to be a guest lecturer at Berkeley, at UC Berkeley, in her television studies class. You know, for any of you out there who are parents, when your kid asks you to do that, it's a really proud moment that they don't want to run the other way, right, from their parents. And then she ended up working at Nielsen in a very prestigious program that they have, which is their ELP program, which is a leadership training program. And after 5 years there, she then went on to Roku. And I joke that we're probably the only mother-daughter streaming duo in town. And she's a PMM, or a product marketing manager for the media and entertainment category at Roku. And so for me, it says a lot. And it's a big accomplishment that, you know, not only have I been able to mentor a lot of not just young women, young men, older women and men. It's something I take very seriously in our industry, but then to see that, you know, in my own life certainly feels like a huge accomplishment. It makes me very proud that someday, you know, people won't be saying to her, "Are you Cheryl Idell's daughter?" You know, it's going to go the other way around, and people are going to ask me, right, if I'm related to Emily.
I love that. Hey, I'm going to divert here for a second because this is relevant to you. There's a question here by Lisa Modisette. I knew her from HBO Max, and I know you know her. Can you read it, or do you want me to read it to you?
I can read it. Hi, Lisa. It's great to see your name up there. And so, you know, Lisa is asking all of us, as we look forward to a new year, what changes we foresee for the media industry that we need to stay relevant for. Which is a great question. And so I worked with Lisa at Warner Media and HBO Max for a while. So I'll take the first pass at this. And I just think that the media industry has become such a blend of needing to and at least for my part of what I do, right? Such a blend of data and technology with still needing to understand humans, right? And storytelling, because no matter what, no matter how much AI we have, no matter how much machine learning we have, all of those things, at the heart of it, we are still telling stories that have to touch people. So I'm very much focused on media and entertainment as I respond to this, right? And it's very easy to get caught up in the technology of it all and what that can let you do. But if you don't really understand the human side, and I would say that's everything from managing people, right, and connecting with the people that you either manage or are colleagues with and do business with, to, you know, creating great stories, whether those are marketing messages or stories for film and TV. Film, is that a thing? But for movies and series, or whether that being as a researcher, understanding how to blend big data and analytics, right, and machine learning and algorithms and all of those things with the real why of what makes people tick. So I think that those are the biggest changes. I think with the pendulum swung very, very far from kind of traditional human touch to heavy duty technology and data and math. And we need to have the blending of the two. And I think the people that are going to be the most successful will be the ones who can understand how to combine kind of the human and machine elements together.
Well said. Thanks. Annie also responded to it in the chat. Do you want to jump in, Annie?
Yeah, no, and I love Cheryl's answer because I think it's right. It's like the technology should always just be there to enable the storytelling, right? It should not be people always like, oh yeah, computers are going to take over and start editing these movies together, and it's like, no, that would be horrible. So she already touched on the machine learning aspect. I think that's actually a really big area. And just wanted to add to that is that in addition to the analytics portion of machine learning, there's really some great strides happening in both the video game engine technology and in machine learning for synthetic beings. kind of an interesting area when it comes to technologies for our productions. This whole concept of like, instead of just shooting, taking out a camera and shooting somebody, it's like, we've always had these computer generated visual effects characters, that you do later on down the line. But the idea with video game engine technologies is that it's like a video game, right? You're building a world and people run around in it, right? Well, that's the same thing as what we do when we make a movie. We build a set and people run around in it. So in this case, you're building a virtual world and you're actually able to put humans into that, or, or have humans, turn into these CG characters. Everyone's seen the, like the little animatic type, things that they overlay onto you, the AR stuff,
Is that the metaverse? Is that the
Uh,
metaverse?
It's like the metaverse, yes. Oh, I thought we were going to get through a panel without saying the M word. But yes, but there's a lot of really interesting things, right? Where it's not going to happen next year, but I think it's starting to turn where the video game world and the traditional media and entertainment world are starting to get blurry. And yes, you're always going to have sort of this passive entertainment and the interactive entertainment sides of things. But the fact that we can utilize technologies from the video game side is actually really interesting. And it provides a lot more interactivity and quicker decision making, for example, for our creatives, because, for example, they could visualize a scene, they can set cameras up, in the scene and start trying to like get their shots ahead of time. And then that actually matches 100% in scale to the real world. And so a lot of the planning and things like that can happen ahead of time, which means that creative decisions can happen sooner. Which then hopefully will make things, move a little bit better when we're actually creating the content. And then, this will be a kind of another plug for Tech Mahindra, is what Debbie was saying, but also, working more in the cloud. Obviously, there's a lot more remote collaboration that's needed now going forward. I mean, people are still starting to shoot. We're going crazy with the production and bonkers here right now with creating content, but I think you're still, because of Omicron and other things, you're going to need to still have to remotely collaborate. And so really getting those tools better. And that's where like the production in the cloud, that kind of stuff helps out there. But yeah, I think I think change is coming. The other thing I just wanted to mention about next year, I feel like, is that we are becoming finally a kinder, gentler industry. I feel like at Universal, for example, I mean, all the way up to our chairman, Donna Langley, who is fantastic, by the way. We have this whole this diversity, equity, inclusion, right? That's really hitting home DEI stuff here in our industry. And I feel like, 25 years ago, people were yelling at each other. Everybody was mean to each other in this industry. You wouldn't take it personally, but it was not a fun necessarily time if somebody was mad or stressed. But I feel like now we're starting to get where people are actually treating each other as humans and understanding, this work-life thing and the fact that we live at work now. And, it's just, I do feel like we're moving towards a better version of our industry where there is a lot more focus on diversity of thought and inclusion and having, treating people better, I think. I think you're still going to have people yelling at each other because they get stressed out, but it's just the nature of things. But I do feel like it's kinder and gentler, which is really fantastic to see.
Do you feel that women are supporting women more these days than you've seen in your career in the past?
You know what? I'm seeing men supporting women more than I've ever seen, honestly. I mean, there used to be, certain men would just be such champions and allies for us, right? But I mean, I'm seeing it now like all over the place. It's great because I feel like, obviously in our industry, there's a lot of certain one type of person, up at the top. But the thing is, I think those folks, at least at Universal, they all feel like, okay, they have had the privilege, of getting to where they're at. There's a reason why they're there. And now it's time to enable others, right? And so that's why I feel like I have hope in this industry, that I feel like finally, like when I was in college, I was the only girl in the engineering classes, or maybe one of two, right? And then I came out in the world and it was like, I was the only, Asian girl or only girl in the woman in all the meetings that I was in and everything. And it was like that for literally 20 years. I feel like now finally there's hope in the next 25 years that you know, I just see a lot of these young women and men that are cropping up now, and they're just fantastic, you know, and they're just so ambitious and really want to get out there and really want to change the world. And it's a great time to start in this industry, I think, because it's really I think we're starting to foster and you know, help others really succeed. And it's just I can't say enough. I just feel like it's finally we're breaking through sort of the you know, the status quo that we've had for so long.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're at the top of the hour, and I am personally so inspired after hearing everybody's stories. All of you have shared something just so important and relevant to your careers, but also just, you know, as far as paying attention and helping out the industry, I think that's something we can all work on as well. So we're closing out 2021, looking forward to 2022. I wish we had more time to talk, but I think we're in a really good place right now for an outlook that is good for next year, as long as COVID gets controlled.
Well,
So-
we'll deal with it, right? I mean, we always have. So
Yeah,
I think
that's right.
that's the thing. I know it sucks, but I mean, we always make it work.
Well, I think it's actually helping the production industry in a really good way too, as well. So anyway, thank you, Ilyanne, and thank you, Annie, and thank you, Cheryl. Wishing everybody a happy holiday, and please reach out to us if you have any questions, you want to be involved in the future, let us know. We're here for you. Okay. Bye,
Happy
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sumit.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thanks, Fabiola.
Video.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Stay safe, stay healthy.
Bye.
Bye for now.
Bye.